Well, earlier we spoke to Veronica Makwadi in Jeppystown in Joburg on the impact of the violence in July 2021. Part of our focus on that disruptive time 3 years on. Now to Nobuhle Modise in Phoenix and Durban. That area, the focus of considerable racial tension during that violence. Nobuhle, good afternoon to you. 3 years on, I imagine you can almost feel some of the problems still in Phoenix.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Indeed, I mean, we've been going around through Phoenix in preparation for this day, where we look back and reflect. And many of the people that we spoke to, it's quite clear that what happened 3 years ago is still very much triggering to a lot of people, even people who weren't particularly victims, but people who saw the violence, people who, you know, everybody was affected in some sort of way. And as we were heading up to this day and conducting interviews and speaking to people about their experiences and what happened during that week, a lot of people have been triggered. And you'd remember the South African Human Rights Commission at the time, that report that came out earlier this year around, the racial tensions that occurred here in Phoenix, found that there was no particular link to the arrest of former President Jacob Zuma. But the CRL Commission, when in its findings, found that there was an adversarial relationship between, people of the African community as well as the Indian community. And you'd also remember that at the time when the violence erupted here in Phoenix, when people were putting up barricades so that people from around Inanda, KwaMashu, Tuzuma, Mawoti, for example, couldn't get through using those main routes, to get in and out of Phoenix. Those barricades were put up and people were unfortunately killed. In that moment, the CRL said the main bone of contention, also dates back to an incident that occurred in 1949 where there were some racial tensions between the African community and the Indian community. But I do have with me here Chris Biyela, who at the time was appointed as the chairperson of a peace committee that was formed as a result of the former police minister coming to the area and trying to find a resolve to what was taking place here. Now let's ask Chris to take us through what their findings were when it came to their committee on the violence that took place here in Phoenix. Thank you very much, Chris.
I greet you and I greet the viewers. When it comes to findings, we figure out that there is still existing tension between, I can say, African people and the Indian community, of which it was a matter of something to ignite that violence, of which the unrest. I think the unrest was the source for Indian community to partake on that action, to fight or to go for that gruesome action or gruesome tragedy that ended up happening here in Phoenix. So that was our finding, that there is this tension which is historically, and then when we go for these meetings where Department of Government is calling us for meetings, then we get to know, we get to learn. When we go for commissions, we get to know, we get to understand the real gist of the matter, what actually caused that gruesome killing of black people.
Chris, let's maybe give the viewers context. When I mentioned 1949, not many people know exactly what took place. What happened in 1949? Because that has been pinpointed as something, that sparked the events that we saw. We spoke to Ntetelelo, who was a victim of the violence and was alive. He made it. He's a survivor. And one of the things he mentioned was the fact that, when they were swearing at him, when they were beating him up, they were saying things that referred to the past that he even had no idea about. So maybe let's talk about the incident of 1949. What is this thing that happened that hasn't been properly documented?
Yes. What actually happened in 1949, historically, what we have learned and what we have told is that the area where we call it Inanda used to be an Indian community area. And there was a clash between African people and the Indian communities, and whereby most of Indian community members were killed by black people. Unfortunately, I believe the government of the time didn't take it to consideration to conduct those proper healings, those proper compensation that will create a conducive a situation, acceptance between the two communities. And when these things left like that, the future generation that will come after will learn about that history. And it will always on their mind, it will always on their heart, that bitterness caused by that incident, which was not treated in a correct manner. Then when a future generation come by, and they will only wait for a small spark, to them it will to pay the revenge. Yes, that's what actually happened, because 1949 the clash took place in town, and then most of Indian communities were staying at Inanda. This is why it's called Inanda. It's an Indian word. This is why we do have Isivananda. It's an Indian word. Nanda Clip, Inanda Seminary. That is where actually Indian communities were dwelling that time. Then after the clash, and then the government secretated them to Phoenix Township.
Thank you very much. That is Chris Biyela, who is the chairperson of the Peace Committee that was formed here as a response to the violence that we saw between the African communities and the Indian communities. And he's just giving context on, some of the reasons that we saw some of that violence taking place, with barricades put up by members of the Indian communities, stopping a certain race from coming through, and unfortunately lives being lost as a result.
Thank you very much indeed for that update. Do appreciate it.